Hello and welcome to the David Icke Connector video cast. Well, what a week it's been for Facebook. But for all the scandal, all the outrage, the fact remains that what has come out this week about breaches of personal information about tens of millions of Facebook users is a tiny fraction of what there is to know about this whole social media search engine Silicon Valley real scandal. I've been pointing out for so long that this Silicon Valley network of giants like Google and Facebook, and Google-owned YouTube, are actually just part of a vast web, an absolutely central part, by the way, of a vast web of intelligence gathering and censorship that ultimately comes out of the Pentagon, out of the US intelligence networks like the National Security Agency and the CIA, and including the big connection between the two, an organization called DARPA, the Technological Development Arm of the Pentagon. And if you read my books, you'll see that from there it goes deeper into the shadows, into a hidden hand that people never see. And so we are looking at a colossal scam played on the human race, whereby you draw them in on the basis of communication. Oh, it's social media. And you draw them in by dominating the search engine market. And once drawn in, then you start trawling their data for financial reasons, but ultimately that's not the main reason. It's to do with creating the global Orwellian surveillance state. And once you've drawn them in and reached a point of near monopoly, then you start censoring what the public can and cannot see and hear, which is precisely what is going on now in terms of YouTube channels and so much more. So what we are looking at coming out or coming through that small area of planet Earth called Silicon Valley, the devil's playground as I call it, we now have the greatest concentration of surveillance and censorship power in known human history. And that is the bigger picture within which the events of this week must be seen. Because what we've been allowed to see in the last few days, thanks to a whistleblower, is a tiny chink of light, or actually a chink of darkness, a tiny gateway into the vastness of what is actually happening. And it involves a company, a British company called Cambridge Analytica, which trawls data and then sells it and uses it for private companies and for politicians and political parties. And what has come out is that they were able to get the data of Facebook users. It is said 50 million of them to use to change political opinions and to get Donald Trump elected. But of course, what's come out since, in terms of hidden cameras exposing the boss of this Cambridge Analytica and what he was saying, that it's much bigger than just the Trump campaign. Companies like this are manipulating elections all over the world and calling it democracy. Now, one of the people involved in this Cambridge Analytica scandal has said that he estimates tens of thousands of other apps may be mining social media for personal data to be sold on in the same way as it was here. Other experts, this report says, said it was possible that virtually the entire Facebook database from 2015 could now be in unknown hands. Of course, they claim 2.2 billion active users on a planet of 7.5 billion people. In 2012, this report says, there was some 9 million Facebook apps, all of whose developers were apparently able to access users' personal details. It is unclear what checks were made on someone applying to Facebook to become a developer. For example, whether they might be a company, a spy agency, or even a mafia gang before personal details were made available. And so we have this access to Facebook personal data, which is then used to target people with specific political advertisements to try to get Trump elected. And this is the election, you may recall, that the Russians were supposed to have manipulated and influenced. This company is said to have been created, Cambridge Analytica, by a shadowy British business with its roots in psychological warfare. And that is what we're looking at. The ability through access to these personal details, personal beliefs, personal preferences, and all the friends of people using Facebook. It is a gold mine for psychological manipulation and targeting. And before, I got no brief for Trump. I think he's appalling. And an absolute hoax and an absolute fraud. And how so much of the alternative media fell for it, goodness only knows. But it's not just Trump that has benefited from access to Facebook personal data. This is a story from this week. They were on our side. Facebook allowed Obama campaign to mine data. This is the respect that Facebook and these other Silicon Valley giants actually have for you. As Facebook faces public anger over Cambridge Analytica harvesting personal information for the Trump campaign, it has been revealed that the social media giant allowed Barack Obama to do the same in 2012. Carol Davidson, former director for media analytics for Obama's 2012 campaign, has poured oil onto the fire by revealing in a series of tweets that Facebook allowed them to do things they wouldn't have allowed someone else to do. that reportedly included sucking out the entire social graph, an individual's network of friends on Facebook, in a bid to target more and more potential voters through friends on social media. After Facebook realized what the Obama campaign staffers had been doing, they preferred to turn a blind eye for one simple reason, Davison claimed: they were on our side. So here we now have, in 2018, claims that we must protect democracy from Russian manipulation, while Silicon Valley, American corporations, are turning a blind eye to things that should not happen in terms of access to their users' privacy, because they support a particular party. Democracy is dead, ladies and gentlemen, while this is allowed to happen. And the scale of contempt that Facebook has for its users can be seen in this story. Former employee talks of horrifying misuse of user data and says it was routine at Facebook. Sandy Parakilas, a former Facebook platform operations manager, claimed the company's horrifying misuse of user data was routine and that Facebook preferred to have no idea what third parties were doing with the freely available data. It is claimed to be likely that hundreds of millions of Facebook users are likely to have had their private information harvested by companies that exploited the same terms as the firm that collected data and passed it on to Cambridge Analytica. My concerns were that all of the data that left Facebook's service to developers could not be monitored by Facebook, so we had no idea what developers were doing with that data, this guy, Parakilas, said. It has been painful watching because I know they could have prevented it. So why didn't they? Because they're useless, because they don't care, or is there another reason? They felt that it was better not to know, he said. I found that utterly shocking and horrifying. He declared, also estimating that a majority of Facebook users probably had their data used by third parties and developers. This is where we are now, in the power that's been allowed to be centralized in the hands of extraordinarily few people in that small area of the world called Silicon Valley. And what also came out in this week of revelation, thanks to a television investigative team capturing the guy Alexander Nix, the boss of Cambridge Analytica, on hidden cameras, is that he was boasting about the way they would use prostitutes and honey traps and people posing as corrupt businessmen to target politicians on behalf of their political clients, to discredit them and put the evidence on the internet, whatever, or hand it to a news outlet, to destroy the credibility and reputation of candidates opposing their political clients. This is one of the things he said. They, speaking of our staff, will set up fake IDs and websites. There are so many options. I've had lots of experiences like this, he boasted. We've just used a different organization, because they talked about using many different front companies to hide who's really behind it. We've just used a different organisation to run a very, very successful project in an Eastern European country. No one even knew they were there. They just ghosted in, ghosted out, and produced really, really good material. And after that, we had this statement from Cambridge Analytica, who since suspended the boss. We entirely refute any allegation that Cambridge Analytica or any of its affiliates use entrapment, bribes, or so-called honey traps. CA does not use untrue material for any purpose. This is after the boss has been caught on camera saying that that's exactly all those things. That's exactly what they do. This is what they call democracy and the voice of the people. But he said one other thing too, that they use Israeli companies to gather intelligence like that on people, because he says Israeli companies are very, very good at doing that. Well, there's a few things to know, really, about that. First of all, any Israeli company that is involved in surveillance or, quote, security will not, without exception, will not be without connections to Mossad, the notorious global Israeli military intelligence operation. And if they were using Israeli companies and Israeli Israeli spies in this Trump campaign, then that takes us on to another level, into a whole new area, because it is claimed in the media this week that Jared Kushner, senior advisor to Donald Trump, his son-in-law, and a lifelong friend of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was one of the key people that hired Cambridge Analytica to the Trump campaign. We should also then not forget that Donald Trump has himself called himself the most pro-Israel US president in history. And his actions ever since he was elected in giving Israel carte blanche to do what it wants in terms of settlements and moving the embassy to Jerusalem, the US embassy, confirms his boast at being the most pro-Israel US president in history. So there are many, many aspects to what has been revealed this week. But the key thing has been access to Facebook's database of private details of their users. And the key thing to constantly remember is that the revelations of this week in terms of what is happening in Silicon Valley is the tip of 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 the iceberg. Because we are looking at this concentration of power that allows increasingly global surveillance of people and global censorship of what the population can and cannot see. Which is why we're having Facebook using its community guidelines as it chooses. Oh yeah, we want you to see that, so you can do that. Well, we don't want you to see that. Oh no, you're against our community guidelines, you're being banned. And then this ruthless assault by Google-owned YouTube on video channels, giving an alternative narrative to the official version of everything. One after the other, after the other, after the other is being deleted without excuse and for no reason, except that of censorship. And Edward Snowden, the National Security Agency whistleblower, said this week, businesses that make money by collecting and selling detailed records of private lives were once plainly described as surveillance companies. Their rebranding as social media is the most successful deception since the Department of War became the Department of Defense. So now we have a situation where these few companies in Silicon Valley, ultimately vassals of the hidden hand, the intelligence and military networks in the background, have such fantastic control over surveillance of people and censorship of people. And we have to suffer people like the T-shirt Zuckerberg playing the I'm just your mate, I'm one of you, hey man, hey. Oh, well, we care, we have a social conscience. Yeah, and I'm an igloo called Ethel. And so we have this story this week, behind all the, oh no, we respect the data of our users. Facebook hypocrites working against online privacy law, says campaigner. Tech giants, including Facebook and Google, are pumping millions of dollars into halting new laws in California, which would expand online privacy protections. Campaigners hope this week's revelations will force a Facebook climb down. As Facebook's share price tumbled this week following the Cambridge Analytica debacle, the chief supporter of the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 accused the Silicon Valley giant and its CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, Mr. T-shirt, of being two-faced. I would try 10, 20 or 30-faced. You might be more accurate. Right now, he said, Facebook's money is saying something different than what they are telling the world, said Alistair McTaggart. In an open letter to Zuckerberg, McTaggart said he was disappointed to learn Facebook is pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into efforts to defeat the act. Last month, Facebook joined Google, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, all nice people, of course, with the interests of the public at heart, in contributing more than $1 million to a political action committee set up to impose the measure, the LA Times reported. The act would require companies to disclose what personal information from Californian tech companies, what they could collect, buy and share. It would allow customers to opt out from those practices and would prevent businesses from charging a higher price to those who make that choice. It would give civilians power to file civil lawsuits after a data breach or for selling their personal information. And these giants, oh, we care about your privacy, they are trying to stop it. Of course they are. Anyone think the intelligent community wants that bill to go through? And just to confirm the connection between governments and Silicon Valley and the military and all the rest of it, here's another story from this week. Uproar after Congress sneaks attack on digital privacy rights into omnibus spending bill. Attaching it to massive spending deal, lawmakers rush through controversial bill which allows law enforcement to hand over personal data without a warrant. Critics of the Cloud Act are rightfully pointing out that it jettisons current human rights protections in favor of vague standards that could gut individual rights. buried in the 2,232-page omnibus spending bill. This is what they do. This is how they get it through. They don't put these things through as a bill on their own, so it's seeable. Oh, not what they're doing. No, drop it in a massive bill of other things, and you hope, and the reason you do it, of course, is that people won't notice. And then suddenly, you can't do that. Oh, yes, we can do that. It was passed in the bill in so-and-so, so-and-so, with 2,232 other pages. Anyway, they buried in this bill that the US House passed on Thursday is a piece of legislation that digital privacy advocates warn expands American and foreign law enforcement's ability to target and access people's data across international borders. Just dropped in a spending bill. We're not trying to manipulate you. The Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data, or CLOUD Act, would add an official provision for US law enforcement to access the contents of a wire or electronic communication and any record or other information for people across all the globe, regardless of where they live and what that nation's privacy laws dictate. Would also create a backdoor into Americans' data, enabling the US government to bypass its citizens' Fourth Amendment rights to access and even use their data. Despite having no formal debate on the legislation and a flurry of urgent warnings early in the week about its attack on digital privacy, rights and civil liberties, federal lawmakers revealed on Wednesday that their $1.3 trillion spending bill would include that CLOUD Act. As I've been emphasizing decade after decade, there is a network, like a web, and connected to that web are the Silicon Valley giants, the intelligence communities, the military, like the Pentagon, governments, political parties, corporations, government agencies that's supposed to police corporations. And they all ultimately answer to the same web, the same masters, and therefore they are working to the same agenda. And so you see government and military and Silicon Valley and intelligence agencies all pushing the world in the same direction. This is how it works. Is it really an accident and a coincidence that Google, which has the ability to dictate what people see and don't see by algorithms in its search engines, is it really a coincidence that the technology that eventually became known as Google was seed funded by the intelligence community and DARPA? Is it really a coincidence that the same is true of Facebook? Is it yet another coincidence that this technology, known as Siri and Echo, this so-called digital assistant technology, which is fusing the human mind into AI through that interaction, is it another coincidence that that technology was seed funded by DARPA in its development? Is it still another one that Google and Facebook are at the forefront of pushing the artificial intelligence agenda to connect the human mind to AI and thus deleting the human mind, which would then become AI? No to all of the above. This is the context that the events of this week involving Facebook need to be seen. And it's the only way, by connecting these dots, that the real significance of these revelations can be understood.